Yoga Connection with Zorananda is a deep dive into the world of yoga, exploring the rich history of tradition, methodology, and practices both ancient and modern. Follow along as yoga is explored through solo episodes to guest interviews to understand its vast reach around the world. Welcome to the Yoga Connection. My name is Zorananda, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mangala Holland, who is someone that I met in Koh Phangan, Thailand, way back in 2012. And we are here today to talk about her work and a little bit into yoga cults and what it looks like, not only being in one but also transitioning out and then using that to inspire others to find the power and the control within themselves to heal from the experiences of being in a cult or just avoiding them altogether. So thank you for joining me today, Mangala. It's a pleasure to see you again. I know it's been a while.
Yeah, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I mean, we can get right into it. I think before we were recording, I was saying that the timing of this episode is really interesting because I'm right in the middle of my Ashtanga yoga series, and I've created this kind of mini series going into the asana portion of Ashtanga yoga, but then diving into the history of yoga. And I've gone to the point of getting into this, like, the third wave of yoga coming to the West, and specifically why yoga has turned into or has become appealing in a way in like a cult kind of setting. So I was, going into Osho and all of the wild stuff that Osho brought to North America. But yeah, I think where we can dive into is for you to explain just like who you are and the work that you do in the UK and in the world.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mangala Holland, and I'm a women's sexual confidence and orgasm expert. And I've been teaching this body of work for about 12 years now. I'm based in the UK. I have clients all over the world, and I run international group programs. I do one-to-one client work, and I work with women and vulva owners of all ages, helping them to overcome their sexual blocks and become confident and empowered in themselves through the vehicle of connecting into their pleasure. And it's really wonderful, rewarding work that I feel so blessed to be able to do this work.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it is important work, right? Because I think for whatever reason, sexual suppression is a part of our upbringing and a part of our society, especially if you're largely religious. But then there's this other side of the modern world right now where there is a lot of like sexual liberation happening, right? Um, and so, you know, what in your practice and in your work, like what does it look like when someone comes to you and they have their story and they are seeking some help and healing around that topic?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess, I work with people of all backgrounds, but there's this common theme and a lot of the clients I'm working with at the moment tend to be perhaps in their 40s or 50s or 60s. And they've got to a point in their lives where they're like, I've got all these other areas of my life sorted out. I've got a great career. My relationship's going okay or good, but I'm still struggling with this. And a lot of them will say I'm struggling with sexual shame, or I don't have the confidence to ask for what I want, or I just don't know what I want. I don't know what works for me. And there is a sense, as you said, about like suppression versus liberation. There is a sense that a lot of people have. It's that everybody else is fine, everybody else is orgasmic, everybody else is liberated, and I'm the only one who's struggling here. Um, and I think back to when I first started getting into yoga, I didn't know this at the time because I didn't have the framework or the language for it. But I think deep down, what I was searching for was just this sense of wholeness inside, a sense of being like really connected to myself and connected to my body and to let go of that kind of shame and awkwardness that I'd had all my life. And I was looking for ways to find that. Um, and that's how I kind of stumbled into this work was because I had huge sense of sexual shame. And in my 20s and my 30s, I was a massive party animal. I'd go out a lot. I was a DJ back in the day. I was, I was at the peak time of acid house here in the UK and going to raves and all of the things. And so I was, again, seeking this liberation, seeking wholeness, seeking freedom. And as I got really kind of tired and exhausted with that party lifestyle, I realized that I'd been, the ways in which I've been seeking it through partying and alcohol and everything else had been superficial and damaging, and I was looking for something more wholesome. And I think, that was my road into yoga and spirituality. And at the same time, that search for meaning and connectivity and authenticity in themselves and with each other. And that's a lot of what my work is when working with women on their sexual healing journey.
Yeah, and it almost seems like, um, you know, starting in a world that is seemingly toxic, but there's so much fun and there's so much exhilaration in that, right? So in the world of partying, in the world of drugs and alcohol, when you're young, it's giving you this like boost of life, especially when you are coming from like a mundane world, right, where you're just working and that's what it seems all that life is about, is just working through the week and then kind of enduring until the weekend, and then when the weekend comes, then you're with your friends and you're out and you're having fun. um,
Mhm.
but then it's not sustainable, right? And for the people that like try to sustain it and they end up getting to their 40s,
Mhm.
and suddenly there's a kind of like identity crisis because there's a seeking that's happening in all that. There's this search for um, uh, having like meaningful experiences, but you're just tapping out your own body's reserves of like through your endocrine system. Um, but it's like it's in a similar vein
Yeah.
for myself too, of like coming out of my teens and into my 20s and partying a lot, to almost this like juxtaposition between experiencing those substances and opening my mind to then asking myself questions about like what am I doing and who I am, that then flips into this searching for greater meaning, right? Which um and I want to see the parallels of your life and how it's led you to finding Agama, and in my own life of having that seed planted in me as well. So when was it in like in your experience of that, did you learn about the yoga school and like how that opened you up to want to go experience that?
Very tail end of my partying, and at that point, it had been almost 2 full decades, and I kind of hit burnout and realized it was, as you say, it wasn't sustainable anymore. So I got sober, and I was still going out and DJing, but I was drinking tea behind the decks. I discovered yoga through gyms. That was a real turning point for me. I had a night, a soul weekender one weekend where I'd mass Sunday night and I was lying in bed and I genuinely thought I was having a heart attack. I really did. And I had to, in that moment, all I could do was I started to slow my breath down and focus on my breath and started to stroke my hand really slowly and focus on slowing my breath. And I don't know, something in me, it was like this internal voice I heard that said, you've got to stop all this nonsense and take up yoga. It really was that's the voice I heard in my head. And so I did. That was overnight. I got sober. So as I say, I took up yoga and I was just doing yoga in gyms. And I realized in those classes that were very much focused on the physical body. And because they were in mainstream gyms, they didn't drop in anything about the kind of spiritual, that there was more to it. Um, but there were enough seeds planted that I knew there was something more to it. And I loved it. I would come out of every class just like feeling amazing. And like I'd go out on a Friday night and I'd be up early to go to yoga on Saturday morning. And I found the balance I was seeking. And not long after that, I decided that my life needed some serious changes because just like you said, all I was doing was getting through the week, and I was a cog in a machine, earning money for stiff dudes in suits. And it was like, there's got to be more to life than this. So I decided to take a year off and go travel. And so I left the UK. I flew out of Manchester and I landed in Delhi. And oh boy, was that a culture shock. Um, and my intention was to spend a year focused on meditation and yoga. And so, yeah, I did a bit of travel in India. I did some voluntary work in Dharamsala, and then I headed to Rishikesh. So I think that was about 3 months into my trip. And I remember getting to Rishikesh, which is considered the home of yoga. And I was kind of both overwhelmed and underwhelmed all at the same time. It was like there was yoga everywhere, and a lot of it was very touristy. And I was like, how do I discern the good from the bad? There was just so much of it out there. And I came across a poster for this yoga school that said they were teaching the traditional yoga that you don't get in the West. And they had an introductory talk to a free class for anybody who wanted to come along and listen to this talk. So I went to this talk, and it was this very eloquent Indian man who, like, it felt like he was speaking to my soul. He was really talking about how what they were teaching was more esoteric and that it was tantric yoga, and I didn't know what that meant. But that, this was something more spiritual. It wasn't the touristy stuff that the rest of the Westerners were getting. And he kind of hinted that this was for the rebels. This was for the people who didn't want to settle down and get married, but were more dedicated to something more meaningful. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is exactly what I've been looking for, but didn't know. I didn't have the language for it. And they said, well, we've got this 1 month course starting next week. And I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to change my plans and stay there for 1 month and do this 1 month course. And so that was my introduction to Agama Yoga. And in India, they were called Trika Yoga. It was all part of the same organization. So I did my 1 month. I loved it. I got a lot of results. I started to really believe that I could feel energy in my system for the first time. They had lots of purification techniques. I loved all the purification because having spent 2 decades really pushing my body to the extremes, I felt I had a lot to purify, and that really I really leaned on that quite heavily. Um, and I loved it, and I felt like I really connected with the fellow students. And then, so after that, I did a 1 month teacher training with Shivananda, which I felt gave me a bit more background into deeper yoga as well. And then I my time in India came to an end. I then went to Thailand, and very quickly, just the shift from India to Thailand felt quite jarring to me. It's like, oh God, suddenly I'm a tourist again instead of immersing myself in all these deep spiritual practices and being in ashrams. And I kind of got used to that. And I was like, well, what should I do? I thought, well, the headquarters for that school are based on Koh Phangan in Thailand. I could go there and check them out. And so it was low season there at the time. There's hardly anyone around, but some higher levels above that. So I stuck around, and then that sticking around for a couple of months into almost 6 years. Yeah.
Wow. And what year was that? Was that period of going to India and then transitioning to Thailand?
Yeah, it was 2009, 2010. So it was early 2010 when I went to Thailand.
Okay. Yeah, because yeah, for me it was 2012, and and I was introduced to it through Asaf. Do you remember Asaf and Blair? Yeah, so his partner Blair at
Yeah.
that time was from Edmonton, where I'm from, and kind of in a similar vein where
Hmm.
I went to a yoga class with a friend of mine one Sunday morning, and Blair was the receptionist, and it was through her that she did the same thing. Like, hey, there's this like introductory to this or this like workshop that we're doing about the chakras, and it ended up being an introductory to Agama Yoga. And I actually invited them to teach out of my apartment. So through the winter, they were basically teaching like the first level of the Agama program. And by December, they were like, "Yeah, we're actually going to Thailand to spend time in the ashram." And it was like right then and there, I just decided, yeah, I'm gonna go, and saved up some money and went. And um, I had a like the same feeling and the same sentiment about the program, right? Like the the yoga program itself to me is actually quite brilliant. And out of, the things that I was finding online, um I felt like I actually found like a genuine yoga school that was hitting all the points that I was looking for in a practice where it was traditional in a sense, and you actually spent time in the asanas, you spent time breathing, focusing on the energies, and then also learning more in-depth philosophies, right? Where, I would look at things online or on the internet at the time, and you would just find kind of obscure websites or some things on YouTube. But then to really find a school that would dive into not only the practice but the philosophies just cracked me open as well. And I remember, my time there, I spent 2 months there, and I had, some of the most beautiful experiences. Um, and
Mm.
Yeah, and so your experience, that basically just like captured you as well, right? And you said that you spent 6 years from that point at the school. Um, and so what were your
Mm.
responsibilities in that? Like, what did you grow into? And as you know, I think not only as a teacher, but then also like administrator in it.
Yeah, yeah. So that's the thing. I rocked up there as this like really shy kind of student who I felt, and when I did the first couple of levels, we were on a separate campus to the rest of the school. The beginners were separated from everybody else, which became the reason for that became clear later on. But yeah, and I remember being really shy. But over the time I was there at the beginning, one of my friends was working in the little reception there, and that was just a little shack, a little hut, a little wooden hut, and they needed a part-time receptionist, and I was like, oh, here's a way I can stay for longer. I did not want to move back to England at the end of my year's travel. So I was like, what can I do to stay longer? And this little reception job came up. It was just part-time hours. I could fit it in around my yoga studies. So great. So I started doing this job and I turned out to be really good at it because, I've got a background in corporate and I'm pretty switched on. And before I knew it, my boss quit and they needed someone to take over being operations manager for the school. And I threw my hat in the ring and I got the job. And there was a bit of it caused a bit of a scene actually amongst like people who'd been there a long time. 'Cause it's like, who's this chick who's just turned up? Like she's still very new, and she's still quite a beginner. And I think that stood me in good stead because at the time, I mean, I was really naive and I had no idea about the stuff that was going on behind the scenes. So that made me like the most perfect kind of poster girl for, hey, no, this isn't a cult. This is normal because I really just believed this whole thing was genuine. I didn't know about all the stuff going on behind the scenes. Um, and I was a very dedicated hard worker. And yeah, so I ended up being operations manager. I ended up being quite integral to the functioning of the whole organization. I ended up becoming in the inner circle because I went through the entire program over the time I was there. So I finished all of the levels. I did the advanced teachings program. They had a series of sashes, which I later found out Nexium also had very similar sash system as well, which Nexium, for anybody listening, was also a huge cult in the US, personal development cult, which I thought was really so interesting. They had a similar system. But yeah, I did the full thing. I did the whole program, got all the sashes, got all the certificates. Um, yeah. And so my whole world was Agama yoga. Everybody in my life was part of the school. Everybody. And my entire social scene revolved around this like 2 kilometer radius on Koh Phangan. It was like I felt like I had all of these friends, this massive community, but actually it was very, very insular when I look back.
Yeah, and that's the tricky thing, right? Because on the surface, you're seeing this school operate and how it's becoming such a strong magnet, right? Like even in my time there, I made sure that I was in this more so
Mhm.
like observational mode rather than like dedicating myself and
Mhm.
participating, where I can take a step back and just look at, okay, this school is attracting people from all over the world, right? It's like this magnet for like specifically Westerners, right? From Germany,
Mhm.
from you name it, from Russia, from the UK, all over the place. And and I thought it was interesting too, like this whole progression of going through the 14 levels of the Hatha program, then the 14 levels of the Kundalini program, and then the advanced. And, I'd hear stories of some of the advanced teachers who would do like the 2 to 3 month long, like chakra sadhana, where you pick a chakra and you just like you're focused in on that one. And as in my naivety, just naturally in being so like taken by this whole program, I'm looking at all this and I'm like, wow, these people are so powerful and they're so dialed in. But then like what you're saying, underneath that
Mhm.
surface is suddenly this infrastructure that is behind the scenes, where the swami knows about it, and I'd probably imagine only a handful or maybe like two or three other people are really understanding what the hidden operation is. And it's interesting that you bring up Nexium, because in my last episode, I like just
Hmm.
briefly mention Nexium because I'm gonna go into it in my final episode to go more into like the modern stuff. Um, but then yeah, like there's something that the Swami is dialing into and touching up on of all the different cults and what they're doing and how they're utilizing that operation. So, um, at what point did you find yourself like catching glimpses
Hmm.
of that?
I mean, and of course, this is with hindsight. I mean, when I look back, I can see a lot of that was very easy to dismiss. So, there were constantly like little glimpses, but things like hearing that he'd been, and I won't call him Swami because I don't think he deserves to have
Okay,
um
fair enough.
that title. So I'll refer to him as his birth name, which is Narcissus, which is interesting. And yeah, but like hearing that he'd been kicked out of India because of certain behaviors, hearing that the root school that this material came from was a Romanian organization called MISA, and the head of that organization is Grigorian Bivolaru, and hearing that he'd broken off, but we were always told he'd broken off from that guy because that guy had gone mad and had distorted the teachings, but actually, like the course material was identical. Like the course papers were identical. It was just the same material. So I kept hearing like little things like, and I remember being in a management meeting where basically everybody was laughing, saying if Narcissus, the reason we were in Thailand was because if we were in the West, he'd be in prison by now. And so, that was kind of like, yeah, that was spoken about quite openly with the inner circle, the management team, the advanced students, which was, looking back, I'm like, wow. But at the time, we were like, I was starting to hear about how he was having sex with students, and I did the Tantra teacher training, and we were told that if you're teaching Tantra, then you can expect people are going to make trouble for you. So these women causing drama was a constant thing that was happening in the school, and we were just told this is what happens in a Tantra school, and if you want to learn from the best, then what you need to do is sleep with the guru. Like that's what we were told. Um, and that became very normalized in that community. It's particularly the further deeper you got into it. If you were just dipping in for a month or two from the West and then going back to the West, you wouldn't be exposed to that. Um, but it's only the longer you were in the organization that these things kind of emerged. And I'd start to hear about complaints about women going for hypnosis sessions with him and then they'd get assaulted or he'd hit on them. And just, yeah, over the years, more and more stuff came out. But it was like I had a massive cognitive dissonance until the same thing happened to me. Um, and then that's when things, the poop hit the fan, I think you could say. Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost it's tragic, that something that is deemed, on the surface so wholesome, right? And like the yoga practice is it is so helpful in so many ways that it just becomes a catalyst for, this person's abuse and this person's like control over people. Um and the thing that I find interesting is when I came back from Thailand, I did a yoga teacher training in August. So this was the summer of 2012, and I did a training through a school called Akanda Yoga, and it's through a local studio here in Edmonton. And in the last week, we went out and did a retreat where the founder of Akanda Yoga came and taught us, and his name is Yogrishi Vishvaketu. And after this training, on I drove back with Vishwaji and another teacher, and we had lunch together. And I was telling Vishwaji about this other school called Agama Yoga. And he's like, "Oh, yes, I know that." And I was like, "Oh, like, how do you know it?" He's like, "I was in the same Gurukul in India with him.
Mhm.
And I was there when he was like starting to develop the Agama program. And he then and there was
Oh,
like, yeah, like be careful with that man because he got kicked out of the Gurukul and he got kicked out of India for like abusing women. And so I just found that like a neat synchronicity that like out of the two teachers that I would like be gravitated towards, they actually knew each other and they had the same teachers. And he told me about like
wow.
the whole thing about him becoming a swami and how he like pressured the school into turning him into a swami, and that was all part of it, right? Because he
Yeah.
needed the guys, he needed um, that label to
Yeah.
be taken seriously, right? And it like you said, right? It's so interesting that his name is Narcissus out of
Mm.
like out of everything to be named, right? Um, yeah, and and so
Yeah,
there was still
totally.
at that time there was still a part in me that was like, well, and that's because I didn't know the full extent of the abuse and the manipulation. And so at the time I still kind of considered that I had these two teachers until
Mm.
I went back in 2016, and then that's where everything was cracked open because yeah, there was um I got to become like really close friends with Sarah, and she just like laid it all out for me and was like, this is all the crazy shit that's happening in the school. And that was like a pivotal point in my like yoga career as well. I
Mm.
was like, oh, it's going to be really important for me to associate with someone that is actually holistic and that is actually like genuine. um and it's no wonder then that like 2 years later, the whole school would seemingly fall apart with all the accusations and B. Schofield's interviews um, and so,
Mhm.
to me, that was like a big learning lesson in what not to do, right? Like, especially being a Westerner, taking on a yoga practice and wanting to teach people
Yeah.
to get in touch with their bodies. It's like now I have this identity crisis. It's like, oh my God, like I participated in this school. So, I can only really imagine what someone like you have gone through where you've not only, gone to the school, you like let go of your life back in England, right? And like really set roots, in Thailand, in Agama.
Yeah.
So, at that point, like what did it take for you to then, like uproot yourself and bring yourself back to the UK.
Yeah. So it got to I think it was like, it must have been either very late 2014 or early 2015, um, where I was in a management meeting and somebody printed out this basically the financial statement. And I really, God, I wish I had an electronic copy of this. But basically, we were all given this piece of paper, and it showed, I'm going to have to say allegedly here, but it showed that there had been some serious misappropriation of funds, and that there was a lot of money coming in cash every month, and it wasn't appearing on the books and had been creamed off, shall we say. And somebody who was the finance officer at the time sent an email around to all of the senior teachers and the management team and a few other kind of inner circle people, and basically kind of somebody blew the whistle about financial wrongdoings there. And honestly, even though I'd already had my own abuse, it was this is when the veil completely dropped, and it wasn't just for me, it was basically the entire management team. And there was some major like crisis talks and meetings going on, and Narciss at the time was blaming greedy teachers for wanting to be paid for teaching yoga, like heaven forbid. Um, and he was telling students that the school was on the verge of bankruptcy, and this was not the case. And we would have students coming in tears to the office saying, "Can we give you money?" And we're like, "No, please don't give us money because that's going to be, and we couldn't say this is going to be lining his pockets, but it's like this awful time. And basically, everybody was either sacked immediately or quit immediately. And I carried on for a couple more months in my position because I had no money at all. I'd been living hand to mouth because I'd been working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day on a Thai wage, which is extremely little. And so I had to work for a couple more months to get myself out of Thailand. But it was like in that moment, like literally the veil dropped and I lost my belief system overnight. I lost my entire friendship network because as soon as I started to try and speak up to my friends, everyone just said I'd gone funny. They didn't believe me. So I lost everything overnight and I didn't feel ready to come back to the UK. So I ended up leaving Thailand with 500 Australian dollars to my name, and I moved to Melbourne on a wing and a prayer, and started a new life in Australia. Um, because at that time, I was still trying to tell people about the sexual abuse, and people were not ready to hear it. Nobody was ready to hear it at that point. And that was 2000. I left in June 2015. And over the next couple of years, I'd periodically get emails from women saying, "Oh, somebody said to connect with you because this has happened to me too." And so there was this groundswell started to happen, and I'd get these conversations with people who were deeply traumatized. And then in 2018, as you say, things came to a head and another incident happened within the school, and I think they gathered 34 testimonials from past and present students who'd experienced harm from either narcissists or the other senior teachers, because it became clear that it was a rape culture, basically from the top down. They tried to resolve it from within the organization, and anyone who knows anything about cults knows that that just doesn't work in the long run. And when it didn't work, that's when they got B. Schofield, the journalist, involved, and she posted the first article, which then got picked up by the Guardian in the UK, and then got a lot more traction because it had to go through lots of very strong legal checks and balances to be able to publish the story.
Yeah, I can only
Uh,
imagine. Um, and and the troubling thing, all that is like the cognitive dissonance, right? Where at least what I found
yeah.
is, interacting with a lot of the advanced teachers or even students who had been there for a while, is there is this conviction to almost abandon your life, right? Like, yeah, I would hear in some lectures that, if you're
Hmm.
here and you're doing this work, that, to some extent that you should leave your family, that that's all in the past, and like what you're doing here is this like deep
Yeah.
spiritual work, and you need to make a new version of yourself that isn't tied to your life in the past and your friends and family. And I remember being on the island in 2016 and having like little conversations with some people here and there that were kind of picking up on all the stuff that was happening, and the sudden fear that they had that they left everything. They don't have anything to go back to. And I just thought
Hmm.
that was what became for
Yeah.
me like so problematic, that then you have these people that suddenly they're kind of like spiritually homeless, right? And it's just because, the people at the top
Yeah. That's
are,
a really good way to put it. Yeah.
yeah, and it's because of it in the organization, the people at the top are hiding this like kind of malevolent force, right? And this like darkness of controlling people. And the sad thing, I remember making a comparison between 2012 and 2016. Seeing Narcissus in the past, and like I would see him as this like kind of seemingly powerful person, like he had this air to him. And
Hmm.
the like the practices that he had and the retreats that he would do, and there was something like almost regal to it. To then 2016, it's like he was almost like a shell of a person. I just saw like this huge like shift. And even hearing stories of like, yeah, he's not doing any of his meditations or any of his yoga practice. He's basically, his practice is sleeping with multiple women every day, and it's like, that's where things clicked and dawned on me. I'm like, oh, okay, this is a cult. Like, um, and that's why, like, I'm so I'm
Yeah,
so glad I'm having this conversation with you, because that's what helped me, like, really set the desire to be anti-cult, and to have these conversations and to have this platform to be able to express to people,
hmm,
look, there's um there's a way to get into the yoga practice and into spirituality that's really beautiful. And then you also want to have the discernment of like who is operating the school that you're looking into. And so, these kind of conversations can help people to navigate towards people who are wanting to be genuine, like you, right? And like work that you do, of what it seems like, everything that you've gone to then land you in Melbourne,
hmm,
that you're getting these emails from women, and now this new seed is being planted of like, oh, I can actually like help these people transition and actually seek sexual liberation in a way that doesn't have that control, that doesn't have that manipulation. So am I right in saying that was like kind of like the starting point of the work that you're doing now?
100%. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even when I was on the island, I was doing private sessions with women, because they would come to me to work with me, and that's the work that I wanted to do. And when I got to Melbourne, and I started teaching in a friend's yoga studio, and I was teaching not so much yoga there, but I was teaching more women's workshops and more on the sexuality side. And I really wanted to help women discover this stuff without the manipulation, without being at risk, without having that harm, and without the dogma, because there was, we were just told this is the true path, and I had no reason to question it because I was quite naive and I'd only done yoga in gyms and I had nothing to compare it to. And because they also taught sexual tantra in Agama, I had no reason to question that that wasn't right either. And because 80% of the stuff we were doing felt great, I was able to kind of put the other 20% in a little box and just kind of say, well, no, everything else is fine, so this must be the right way. Um, and yeah, so it was a real turning point for me, and particularly when I moved to Melbourne, I wasn't on this sunny island with backpackers and travelers kind of coming through, wanting the fun in the sun and the spiritual transformation. I was dealing with normal women with, you know, businesses and kids and normal lives and heavy shit. And and so it was like more than ever, like I was like, I want people to have the experience of the powerful transformation without the predators, without, helping people find their own power from within. Um, because that's what it's all about. It's about finding power from within rather than outsourcing it without this power over, which had been the dynamic in Agama every step of the way. And I look back, I had to question everything, and I had to really like analyze every single thing I'd learned there, like what is real, what isn't real, because the way they taught yoga in Agama, and I'm sure you probably remember this, like from the very first asanas that you were doing, they were telling you not just what position to put your body in, they were telling you what to think and what to feel. Like whatever, they they were very specific. They called them mnemonics in the teaching there, that you had to say the same words every time for this exact. We were all taught to teach the same thing. So right from the very beginning, anybody going in for their first drop-in class was in that first process of being taught what to feel and what to think, which looking back to me is hypnosis. Um, I didn't
Yeah.
know that at the time, and so that it really this is so a lot of the work that I started to do was I started to do my healing through therapy and somatic processes was I had to really start to unravel that and not be putting my body into a position and being told what to feel and what to think. I had to start using deep, and that is a core part of the work that I do with my clients.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was thinking too. That it is a form of hypnosis, and you can only imagine that if you're going in day after day, even just for the month, and you're being programmed to accept the belief
Hmm.
systems, right? And so, if like you were saying earlier, if the from the top down,
Yeah.
it's built on this rape culture, and it's built on manipulation and sexual coercion, that then from the ground up you're building a belief system that's going to be accepting of that kind of behavior. And so I can imagine then after, like, being in it for years, there's a lot of deprogramming that's going to have to take place. Unfortunately, due to some technical difficulties on my end, lost about the last 10 minutes of our conversation. So Mangala, if you're listening to this, I'm so very sorry. Um, I think between our connection and distance on Zoom or something happened. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But yeah, um, I'll have Mangala on again in the future, into the new year, and we'll go deeper into our conversation of her work and what she does to help people and her clients achieve sexual liberation and healing any repression on that side of things, and also going deeper into yoga cults and what it takes to not only avoid them, but if you are in a cult, how to get out of them, because that's going to be the hardest thing. There's one point that we're talking about the hypnosis that's involved and how someone like Narcissus, who was the creator of Agama, used hypnosis to capture his students and not only be able to capture people, but then to justify doing terrible things. And this kind of like top down approach where, from the top down, they're utilizing the information from yoga, and they're utilizing the practice to embed certain pneumatics and certain phrases and certain programming to capture your mind and to capture your consciousness to then justify doing the kind of terrible things that he and his top students were doing, top teachers were doing, to the point where then from the ground up you have the system of control. And people who put themselves in a vulnerable position where they are literally leaving their entire life, they're coming to this island and they're abandoning their friends and their family to position themselves, only then to realize that they're indeed in a cult and indeed have been coerced to doing terrible things, like the women um, in the school that have experienced. And so it was a pleasure talking to Mangala and to get her perspective on what it takes not only to endure being in that situation, but then to come out of it and then to heal it, in this process of her coming out of the school, moving to Melbourne, Australia, and then back to the UK to really further develop her practice. And I'm still kind of beating myself up that I lost 10 minutes of the conversation, but such is life and you have to just roll with it. So Please check out her work. The links are in the description, links to her website, links to her social media, and an Amazon link to her book. Because what she's doing is really impactful. She's helping people all over the world with her practice and her teachings, and the work that she's doing and helping people. The thing that really stood out to me in the work that she's doing is she spends a lot of time with her clients. So it's not just her doing one-on-ones. She'll spend up to 6 months plus working with someone and getting in touch with their sexuality, getting in touch with who they are as a sexual person, and what that means as someone in their later years, getting back in touch with that. And yeah, it's really beautiful work, and I look forward to speaking to her again. And I really hope you like this episode. And yeah, please get in touch with her if you have any questions. And that's it for today. Thanks for listening. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Enjoy.